the summer barbecue should have been perfect. Laughter, sizzling grills, and friends crowded around the yard. But in a split second, everything turned unreal. One loud shot shattered the air, screams cut through the music, and my wife collapsed. I couldn't believe it. How could a quiet suburban street, the kind where everyone knows everyone, descend into chaos so fast? And the person holding the gun claimed they didn't even realize what they were doing. Could a neighborhood feud really escalate into something this terrifying? Or was this the tip of an iceberg I never saw coming? Life in our quiet suburban neighborhood always felt safe. Manicured lawns, children riding bikes down the streets, and neighbors exchanging polite smiles over fences. My wife and I had moved here hoping for stability, a place where weekend barbecues were the highlight of our week, not a battleground. Our home wasn't extravagant, but it was ours, and we took pride in the little things. Freshly painted shutters, a flower bed that changed with the seasons, and a backyard that invited gatherings under the sun. For a while, everything seemed perfect. We knew the routines of our neighbors, who kept to themselves, and the HOA regulations were just another formality. Rules about lawn height, mailbox decorations, and holiday lights. They felt harmless. Yet, beneath the surface, whispers of grievances and petty disputes were bubbling. A neighbor had recently complained about a garden gnome, another about a fence that didn't meet community standards. It was minor at first, almost laughable, but it planted the first seeds of unease. Little did we know, the same neighbor, who smiled politely at the mailbox every morning, harbored a fixation with control and perfection. The kind of person who sees harmless backyard laughter as a personal affront. We had no idea that what began as subtle notices, friendly suggestions, and quiet warnings would escalate into something far beyond anything we could imagine. Turning our peaceful street into a stage for chaos, absurdity, and fear. And as the sun rose that morning of the barbecue, we had no inkling that the seemingly innocent joys of neighborhood life were about to collide with the darkest extremes of HOA obsession. The first warning came subtly, almost invisibly, tucked into a bland envelope with the HOA's emblem stamped at the top. We had left our mailbox checked the night before after a quiet weekend, expecting perhaps a friendly neighborhood update. Instead, it contained a formal notice our lawn was non-compliant. The grass, which we meticulously mowed, trimmed, and watered, had allegedly exceeded the height by a mere half-inch. A penalty of $150 was listed, along with a threat that repeated offenses could escalate to liens against our property. At first, it felt like a bureaucratic glitch, something minor that could be easily rectified. We trimmed the offending blades of grass, double-checked every corner of the yard, and even photographed our progress to prove compliance. But the relief was short-lived. The next week, another letter arrived, this time concerning our flower bed. The HOA claimed the colors of our blooms violated the aesthetic continuity of the street. A phrase so vague it felt like it had been plucked from a dystopian manual of control. By then, the frustration was beginning to settle in, a tight knot of anxiety in the pit of my stomach. Then came the inspections. A parade of HOA representatives appeared without warning, walking through our property with clipboards, measuring tapes, and scrutinizing eyes. One afternoon, a woman in a crisp blouse and an expression that never faltered told us our garden gnome was offensive, because it was painted a shade of red the community deemed inappropriate. Another evening, a man wearing sunglasses and a carefully forced smile pointed out that our mailbox leaned slightly to the left, a deviation invisible to anyone except the trained eye of a person obsessed with perfection. every friendly interaction with neighbors started to feel like a potential threat. Casual walks past the street turned into tense calculations. Was that wave genuine, or a veiled warning? Was the neatly trimmed hedge on the corner somehow a critique of our slightly crooked fence? Even our weekend barbecues became fraught with anxiety, the joyous clinking of glasses overshadowed by the looming thought of another punitive notice. But the real turning point came when an anonymous complaint appeared on the HOA portal, accusing us of excessive outdoor noise during a simple backyard dinner. Our friends, laughing, sharing stories, and enjoying the late afternoon sun, had become evidence against us. The message outlined fines escalating by the hour, threatening legal action if disturbances continued. At that moment, the absurdity and menace of the situation collided in a dizzying mix. We were living in our own home, yet every ordinary act had been twisted into a potential violation. Attempts to reason with the board only amplified the tension. Emails went unanswered for weeks, phone calls transferred endlessly, and when meetings were finally scheduled, the conversation was dominated by lectures on community standards. Rather than actual dialogue, our words were twisted, dismissed, or documented as resistant behavior, feeding the bureaucratic machinery that seemed designed to wear us down. Each notice, each inspection, each new rule seemed less about the community and more about proving a point: compliance, control, submission. As the weeks turned into months, the neighborhood itself became a stage for paranoia and suspicion. The simplest gestures were interpreted as provocations. We noticed neighbors glancing over fences, taking notes, sometimes even filming our yard. The joy of living in a community eroded, replaced by the tension of constant surveillance. Barbecues, once our sanctuary, became exercises in stealth, lowering voices, limiting laughter, and timing music so that no complaint could be lodged. The absurdity gnawed at our sanity. And yet, amid this escalating chaos, the human instinct to fight back stirred. Small victories felt monumental. A successfully trimmed hedge, a complaint dismissed, a minor fine waived after meticulous documentation. But each victory was always temporary. The HOA adapted, inventing new rules, enforcing old ones with renewed vigor, and maintaining a steady pressure that never let us forget we were under siege. The emotional toll became inescapable. My wife grew cautious, avoiding eye contact with passing neighbors, while I felt a constant, low-level anxiety that threatened to spill over at any moment. Sleep was punctuated by the imagined sound of letters sliding under the door, the rustle of clipboards on our porch, or the distant murmur of complaints in hushed tones. The neighborhood had transformed into a psychological battleground. And then came the day of the barbecue. The one we had been cautiously planning for weeks. We tried to reclaim a fragment of normal life, to invite friends into our home without fear. The grills were lit, the laughter tentative but genuine, the smell of roasting meat mingling with the summer air. For a moment, it seemed we had reclaimed our sanctuary. But the tension was thick, almost palpable, like a storm waiting to break. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, a shadow appeared near the fence line. A figure we recognized, our most obsessive neighbor, the one whose complaints had driven this slow, burning nightmare, stood watching with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. Nothing happened at first, only the silent, suffocating scrutiny. But the air had changed. That unblinking gaze, combined with months of simmering resentment, foreshadowed the eruption that would shatter the fragile normalcy we had tried to rebuild. And, in that moment, the audience might wonder, could a neighborhood dispute, built on trivial rules and petty enforcement, really escalate into something dangerous? Could a summer barbecue, a symbol of joy, community, and togetherness, be the spark for chaos that no one anticipated? The answer would come faster and more violently than anyone could have imagined. The moments after the chaos of the barbecue felt surreal, almost as if time itself had fractured. The smoke from the grill hung in the air, mingling with the scent of charred meat and the acrid sting of adrenaline. Friends clustered in the yard, frozen, unsure how to react. Emergency responders moved swiftly, creating a barrier between us and the neighborhood that had suddenly become unrecognizable. In those first tense minutes, everything we had once taken for granted, the sense of safety, community, even ordinary suburban tranquility, felt irreversibly altered. Despite the shock, the aftermath became a catalyst for clarity. We were determined not to be defined by fear. The legal process moved quickly, and with thorough documentation of the months-long harassment, we gained the leverage we had lacked during the escalation. Letters, inspection reports, and screenshots of digital complaints revealed a pattern of obsessive control and intimidation by the HOA. The absurdities that once seemed trivial, the gnomes, the flowers, the mailbox alignment, suddenly coalesced into evidence of a system wielded as a weapon. Our attorney guided us through the labyrinthine legal structure, making sense of bylaws, covenants, and the peculiar quirks of HOA governance. Each clause we had once struggled to understand became a piece of a larger puzzle, demonstrating not just unfair enforcement, but potential negligence and misconduct on the part of the HOA leadership. The process was exhausting, emotional, and often infuriating. But every meeting, every filing, every formal complaint brought us closer to reclaiming control over our lives. Community perception shifted as well. The neighbors who had been distant or wary began to see the broader reality. The petty disputes and minor complaints that had once divided the street now looked absurd against the backdrop of the near-tragic incident. Conversations that were once hushed became open dialogues about fairness, governance, and the limits of authority. People who had previously avoided involvement stepped forward, lending testimony, support, and, for some, an acknowledgement of shared frustrations. What had been a private nightmare began to reveal systemic issues, and in doing so, it connected us to a broader network of those advocating for sanity and compassion in community management. Financially and legally, the resolution was decisive. The HOA faced penalties, and the aggressive leadership members were either removed or stripped of enforcement privileges. Fines levied against us were rescinded, and new oversight mechanisms were established to prevent the kind of arbitrary intimidation that had turned our lives upside down. But more importantly, the psychological and emotional victories were profound. We reclaimed our yard, our voice, and our right to live without fear in our own home. The act of standing firm, of documenting, of challenging authority, became a testament to the resilience that ordinary homeowners can summon when faced with extraordinary pressure. The neighborhood slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Barbecues resumed, though with a lingering awareness of how close everyday life had come to being irrevocably disrupted. The streets were no longer a theater for petty obsession, but a place where neighbors could interact with caution. Informed by experience, yet not paralyzed by it, our community, once fragmented by fear and unilateral enforcement, began to rebuild trust, aided by the shared recognition that balance and fairness must guide governance if a neighborhood is to thrive. On a personal level, the incident reshaped our priorities. The fear, the adrenaline, and the trauma left scars that were subtle yet persistent. But they also fostered a heightened sense of vigilance, empathy, and empowerment. We learned the value of preparing for worst-case scenarios, of documenting interactions, and of speaking up when systems meant to protect can be twisted into instruments of control. What had begun as a simple desire for a peaceful suburban life transformed into a masterclass in resilience, strategy, and the limits of human patience. Friends and family, initially horrified and uncertain how to help, became central to the healing process. Their support reinforced the understanding that community is not just a set of laws or a collection of houses. It is an ecosystem of relationships, trust, and mutual respect. Each act of encouragement, each phone call, each shared meal reaffirmed that life could continue, that joy could be reclaimed even after trauma, and that ordinary people, when united, can resist extraordinary injustice. The broader impact rippled beyond our street. Local news outlets picked up the story, not sensationalizing it for shock but highlighting the dangers of unchecked HOA authority. Online forums, community boards, and social media discussions exploded with shared experiences, advice, and warnings for others who might be navigating similar conflicts. In a strange twist, our misfortune became a cautionary tale, a blueprint for both accountability and empowerment. Others could now see that harassment need not be tolerated, that rules can be challenged, and that courage in the face of bureaucracy is both possible and necessary. Yet, even with the legal victories and community support, the emotional journey was ongoing. Sleep returned gradually, and the hypervigilance that had defined the past months began to fade. But the incident remained a lens through which everyday events were refracted, a reminder that safety and normalcy are never guaranteed and must sometimes be actively defended. The emotional weight of that summer barbecue would never fully disappear, but its transformative effect, shifting fear into action, chaos into clarity, became our lasting takeaway. As the months turned into years, the lessons endured. Neighborhood life resumed with new boundaries, clearer communication, and a more conscientious HOA board. Our yard was restored, not just physically, but symbolically, a reclamation of space, autonomy, and dignity. Friends and neighbors returned to gathering spots that had once been scenes of tension, sharing laughter, food, and stories that reminded us why we chose this life in the first place. Ultimately, the most profound realization was simple yet powerful. Authority unchecked can escalate into absurdity and danger, but resilience, preparation, and community can restore balance. We learned that peace is not passive, it requires vigilance, documentation, and sometimes confrontation. We also discovered that the human capacity for both pettiness and courage exists side by side, and that navigating between the two defines the quality of everyday life. So, as we stand in our backyard today, looking at the flowers, the perfectly aligned mailbox, and the open space where laughter once filled the air, a question lingers. Not as a threat, but as a reflection. What would you do if your home, your sanctuary, became a battlefield overnight? And when the systems designed to protect turn oppressive, will you find the strength to reclaim your life, or let fear dictate your days? The story doesn't just end with us. It echoes in neighborhoods everywhere, a reminder that ordinary people can confront extraordinary control, and that even in the most absurd and harrowing circumstances, agency, resilience, and hope endure. The barbecue may have left scars, but it also left a legacy, a blueprint for courage, a testament to standing firm, and a challenge to anyone who thinks they can dictate life in someone else's home.